France welcomes over 80 million visitors every year, more than any other country in the world. Yet what's strange is that most people who come here only ever see the surface. They take a photo in front of the Eiffel Tower, stroll through a few familiar streets, sip a hurried coffee, then leave believing they have understood France. In reality, they've only touched the outermost layer of a country with far greater depth. Because there is a question not everyone asks: why do some people come to France? And then never want to leave, not because of famous landmarks, not because of beautiful images on social media, but because of two things far quieter, far harder to name. The people, especially the way French women are present in everyday life, and the living space, the cities, the homes, the architecture built not to impress, but to be lived in across generations. This video won't rush to explain. It won't try to persuade you to love France. It simply invites you to stay a little longer, to listen and observe, and to feel why this place, without ever trying to seduce anyone, still makes so many people unable to walk away. 1. Beauty in France is not loud. It doesn't step forward to demand attention. It needs no spotlight, no introduction. In France, beauty doesn't arrive as a declaration. It exists as something quietly present, close enough to be felt, yet distant enough to never be fully grasped. You can see it in the way people walk along a narrow cobblestone street. There is no rush, no performance. Each step has its own rhythm, as if there's nothing to prove and nowhere to hurry. You notice it in the gaze, not intrusive, not openly inviting, but deep enough to make the other person slow down for a moment. And sometimes that beauty lives entirely in silence, in the way someone sits by a window, doing nothing at all, yet somehow making the space feel complete. French women are rarely concerned with being perfect. They don't chase flawlessness. What they do have very clearly is a strong awareness of themselves. They know who they are, where they stand, and they don't feel the need to become another version of themselves to be accepted. Beauty then doesn't sit on the surface, it lives in self-possession, in the ability to be fully present without asking for validation. When placed side by side, the cultural contrast becomes clear without needing explanation. In the United States, beauty is often linked to directness and openness, strong energy, easy access, easily defined. In France, beauty is restrained. It doesn't give everything away at once. It leaves space. Just enough space to invite curiosity, to encourage observation, and to require a small step forward from anyone who wants to understand it. And perhaps that is why beauty in France never overwhelms you at first glance. It doesn't ask for your attention. But once you notice it, it becomes very difficult to look away. 2. French cities, spaces that are respected. In France, architecture does not exist to shock or overwhelm. It doesn't try to make you look up in awe or demand admiration at first glance. Instead, it stands quietly, solid enough to endure, humble enough to become part of everyday life. French cities are not designed to impress in a moment, but to be lived with year after year. Simply standing still on any street, you begin to notice this consistency. Wrought iron balconies, thin and delicately curved, are not there for photographs. They are places where people step out in the morning with a small cup of coffee, lean on the railing in the late afternoon, or quietly watch the city move below. In France, a balcony is part of daily life, not decoration. Tall, symmetrical windows stretch vertically, allowing daylight to travel deep into the home. During the day, sunlight reflects off aged wooden floors and time-worn walls. At night, wooden shutters are closed not only to keep warmth in or eyes out, but to create a gentle boundary between private space and the outside world. Shutters in France are more than objects. They establish the rhythm of day and night, a rhythm of opening and retreating, of presence and rest. Then there are mansard roofs, steep double-sloped roofs with small windows tucked beneath them. This style is not only elegant, but practical. It transforms what could have been empty space into living quarters. Each level under the roof becomes another layer of life, another generation added above the last, not replacing it, but continuing it. What stands out most is not any single detail, but the way everything comes together without competition. Buildings in France do not fight to stand out. They exist beside one another, responding quietly, creating a harmonious urban rhythm. Space is treated as a shared memory, where every home carries traces of the people who once lived there. And from this relationship with space, a philosophy of living naturally emerges. The French do not build to impress. They build to live with across generations. When space is respected, life slows down. Time is no longer forced or fragmented, but allowed to flow slow enough to be felt and stable enough to endure. 3. Building laws and collective responsibility. In France, architecture is not only admired, it is protected. And that protection does not come from individual sentiment, but from a strict legal framework that society has collectively agreed upon across generations. The French understand one thing very clearly: without discipline, beauty disappears faster than almost anything else. That is why demolition or arbitrary renovation is rare. An old building cannot simply be torn down because it feels outdated. A facade cannot be repainted according to personal taste if it disrupts the harmony of the street. In many towns and historic districts, wall colors, wooden doors, roof angles, and even roof tiles are regulated. Not to restrict individuality, but to preserve a shared visual order, one that existed long before any current resident arrived. What truly matters is how space is understood. A street does not belong to one person. A building facade is not merely private property. It is part of a collective memory. When you alter it, you are not only changing your own life, you are interfering with a story shared by an entire community. And because of this, every personal decision carries social responsibility. Here, architecture moves beyond aesthetics and becomes a matter of sociology. French building laws are not designed to make places more beautiful than yesterday, but to ensure continuity is never broken. A cafe that has existed for centuries, an apartment passed down through generations, a street corner where bougainvillea has bloomed in the same place for decades. These are all the result of patience and respect for the past. This system requires individuals to surrender a degree of personal freedom in exchange for a greater common beauty. You cannot be different simply because you can. You must ask whether that difference damages the whole. And it is this question that shapes a society deeply aware of responsibility. In France, beauty is not left to passing trends or temporary tastes. It is sustained by law, by collective agreement, and by a shared way of living. Space, therefore, is not merely a place to live, it is a living heritage preserved daily by people who understand that they are only passing through a much longer continuum. And when individuals recognize their role within that continuum, beauty no longer needs to be constantly recreated. It endures quietly and deeply over time. 4. The French rhythm of life: slow but not lazy. When space is respected, people naturally change the way they relate to time. In France, slowness is not the result of a lack of ambition. It is the outcome of a conscious choice to live more deeply rather than move more quickly. Mornings in France begin simply. A warm piece of bread, sometimes just a baguette with butter or jam. No one walks down the street holding a takeaway coffee. Coffee is enjoyed after sitting down when there is time for it. Because the morning is not something to rush through, but a part of the day meant to be fully experienced. At lunchtime becomes even more tangible. This is not a brief pause to refuel and return to work. Lunch is its own space where people sit together, talk, debate, and laugh. There is dialogue. There is presence. It is rare to see someone eating alone in silence, and even rarer to see someone eating while staring at a screen. In France, eating is a social act, not a matter of convenience. Then there is the café, a small table, one cup of coffee, and plenty of time. People may sit for 2 hours with a single drink without ordering more, without being rushed. No one pushes them to leave because staying is not seen as occupying space. A café is not a place to pass through, but a place to remain, to observe, to think, to sit in silence if needed. It is here that the French rhythm of life becomes most visible. Slowness in France is not a lack of ambition. It is a deliberate priority. A priority given to presence, to conversation, to moments that seem small, but accumulate into a lasting quality of life. If you're listening and feel this rhythm resonate with you in a personal way, leave a comment. It doesn't have to be long, just enough to say that something here reached you. 5. Rest is a right, not a reward. In France, rest is not placed at the end of life's priority list, waiting until everything else is finished. It is not something you have to earn. Rest is treated as part of the structure of life itself, necessary, legitimate, and not in need of justification. People in France are entitled to a minimum of 5 weeks of paid vacation each year. Not on paper, not to be saved for later, but to be used. And they do use it without guilt, without fear of being judged as less committed. Here, stepping away from work for a while does not mean abandoning responsibility. It simply means returning to the rest of one's life. There is a law that reflects this mindset, clearly the right to disconnect. After working hours, employees are not obligated to respond to emails, messages, or calls related to work. Not because of laziness, but because personal time is considered inviolable. Family, friends, dinner, and even silence itself are things worth protecting. Then come July and August. In many parts of the world, these are peak working months. In France, the country slows down. Cities grow quieter. Offices close. Roads leading to the countryside. The mountains and the sea fill up. Not everyone travels far, but almost everyone steps away from routine. Summer break is not an escape. It is a collective ritual, a reminder that human beings were not born solely to sustain momentum. Within this system lies a simple but powerful message. Work does not define the whole person. You are not just a job title on a business card, not just productivity or hours logged. You are also the person who sits down for dinner with family, who walks slowly through a park, who has the right to disappear from the work schedule without apology. France is not a perfect society, but it has drawn a clear line between labor and life, between contribution and presence. And that line creates an interesting paradox. When people are allowed to rest properly, they do not do less. They simply work at a different rhythm, one that is more sustainable and more human. 6. France is not a single feeling. France cannot be contained within one image, one rhythm, or one fixed mood. Each region carries its own tone like different chapters of the same book. And as you move from one place to another, you don't just change scenery, you change the way life feels. On the Riviera, light is the first thing that reaches you. A sharp, luminous light that reflects off blue water and sun-washed hillsides. This is a place shaped by ease and refinement, where time moves slowly but deliberately. Nothing feels rushed, as if the light itself has softened every movement. Travel north and Normandy reveals a different world. Gray skies, cold winds, deep seas, and white cliffs standing in quiet isolation. There is a distinctive sense of solitude here, but not emptiness. Nature is present and powerful, reminding you of your own smallness. Life slows, becomes quieter, leaving room for reflection. In the Loire Valley, time seems to flow differently. Ancient castles do not stand like museum pieces, but as living parts of history. The past here is not sealed away, it blends into rivers, vineyards, and open landscapes. Moving through the Loire feels like stepping into a long continuum where past and present coexist rather than compete. Provence awakens another set of senses. The air is filled with scent lavender herbs, warm earth under the sun. Small villages rest beneath golden light, evoking memory more than expectation. In Provence, people do not search for novelty. They look for familiarity, as if they have been here before at another moment in their lives. Then there are the Alps, a place where nature sets clear rules. High peaks, cold air, precisely carved paths. Beauty here is not gentle, but disciplined. Every movement requires care. Every decision, respect. Nature does not invite it challenges. And in that challenge lies a different kind of calm, one born from knowing and honoring limits. Each of these regions tells its own story. Together they form a France that cannot be reduced to a single feeling. You don't come to France to find one experience, you move through it, to change the way you perceive time, space, and yourself. 7. France doesn't need to seduce. France has never tried to invite anyone in. It doesn't need to prove its worth, and it doesn't try to convince you that it is a place to belong. France simply exists as it is slow, discreet, and layered with depth. Those who resonate with it stay. Those who don't quietly move on without persuasion, without promises. Because France is not for everyone. It does not suit those who need immediate clarity, fast results, or constant motion. Here, everything follows its own rhythm, a rhythm that does not bow to urgency. And precisely because of that, France never lowers itself to please. Those who remain rarely stay for the scenery or the reputation. They stay for the feeling of living alongside time rather than fighting against it. For meals that don't need to be rushed. For streets that allow you to walk slowly. For a life where people are not reduced to job titles or work schedules. And at this point, the question is no longer whether France is beautiful or not. The question turns inward. France does not ask how much money you have. It only asks, do you have the patience to live deeply? Or do you still need to live fast if you value perspectives that aren't polished or romanticized? Press like to support this way of storytelling. And leave a comment below, is France the rhythm of life you're looking for at this moment in your life?